Stop
Cop
resisting right
wrecked
now.
black
Give me your
man's
hands.
I
$200
haven't done
K
anything!
Ferrari.
Get off me!
Had no idea he's an FBI
Hands
agent.
behind your back, now.
From his early days at the FBI Academy to his current role as a senior agent handling complex cases, he had built a reputation for calm thinking, sharp observation, and unshakable focus. Today, he was driving his Ferrari, a gleaming black $200,000 machine he had purchased not just as a status symbol, but as a rare reward to himself after years of service. The car was more than just metal and horsepower. It was a reminder of the sacrifices he had made, the nights he spent working late, and the countless hours devoted to keeping people safe. The morning air was crisp, almost electric, as Marcus navigated the city streets. The sun reflected off the hood of his car, creating streaks of light that danced across the pavement. Traffic was lighter than usual, and for a moment the world seemed peaceful. He glanced at his phone, reviewing notes on a high-priority investigation. Every second mattered in his line of work, and he had made it a habit to prepare for every scenario, even during a short drive to his office. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Officer Daniel Reynolds, a 20-year-old officer with just 3 years on the force, was navigating the same stretch of road. Reynolds was responding to a minor call at the other end of the city, and though he was trained to follow protocol, a slight lapse in attention would soon have life-changing consequences. Reynolds had been taught to respect the streets and the people on them, but his focus had wavered for just a moment. As Marcus approached an intersection, he slowed slightly, noticing the traffic light ahead. It was green for him, but he was careful as always, aware that accidents could happen in an instant. He checked both mirrors, his hand steady on the leather steering wheel. His mind, however, was only partially on the drive. The rest was focused on the meeting he had later that morning. Suddenly, a blur of movement appeared from his left. Officer Reynolds had entered the intersection, not noticing the red light. In that split second, Marcus realized something was wrong. He hit the brakes, feeling the familiar tension that comes before impact. Despite his quick reaction, it was too late. The Ferrari was struck on the side, metal colliding with metal, glass shattering across the pavement. The sound was deafening, a mix of grinding steel and breaking dreams. Marcus' heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the vibrations of the collision through the steering wheel. His first thought was for safety, himself and the officer. He looked around quickly, assessing the scene. People on the sidewalks had stopped, their eyes wide with shock, some taking out phones to record what had just happened. The Ferrari, once a symbol of perfection and control, now sat with a crumpled door and a shattered side mirror. Officer Reynolds scrambled out of his vehicle, clearly shaken. His training kicked in as he approached Marcus, but his face revealed confusion and panic. "Are you okay?" Reynolds asked, almost nervously, as if expecting a dramatic reaction from the man he had just collided with. Marcus, although frustrated and stunned, remained composed. "I'm fine," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. He took a deep breath, letting the initial shock subside. His attention quickly shifted to the car. The damage was significant, far beyond what insurance alone could easily cover. The Ferrari wasn't just a car. It was a piece of personal history, a reward for years of service, and it now sat mangled in the middle of the street. Reynolds began explaining what had happened, detailing how he had been responding to a call and didn't see the red light. His words tumbled out quickly, almost as if he was trying to reassure himself as much as Marcus. Marcus listened, nodding slightly, but his mind was already calculating the next steps. Insurance claims, repairs, reports, all standard procedure, but he also knew this situation required careful handling. As an FBI agent, he was no stranger to delicate situations, and he understood that a misstep here could escalate unnecessarily. Meanwhile, bystanders had gathered. Some whispered to one another, expressing shock at the expensive car now damaged on the street. Others offered Marcus sympathetic glances, as if understanding the pain of seeing a prized possession destroyed. A few even whispered assumptions about wealth and privilege, not knowing the man inside the Ferrari was someone who dedicated his life to protecting others, often at great personal cost. Marcus stepped out of his car, taking in the scene. He noticed that Reynolds was younger and inexperienced, his uniform slightly disheveled, his posture tense. Marcus could see the worry in the officer's eyes, the realization that he had made a serious mistake. He chose not to escalate the situation immediately. Anger and frustration were natural reactions, but Marcus had learned that calmness often led to better outcomes. He took another deep breath, reminding himself that patience and strategy were just as important here as they were in a high-stakes investigation. The sound of traffic continued around them, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant compared to the moment at hand. Marcus walked closer to the Ferrari, inspecting the damage. The side panel was deeply dented, the wheels slightly misaligned, and the expensive paint scratched beyond simple repair. He sighed quietly, knowing that fixing the car would take weeks and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Yet amid the frustration, he also recognized a strange sense of irony. Here he was, a man trained to deal with life-and-death situations, facing a scenario where patience and composure mattered more than skill or authority. Reynolds continued speaking, explaining how he intended to file the accident report and handle insurance details. Marcus listened carefully, noting every word. He could sense the officer's fear of consequences, fear of being judged, fear of having done wrong. Marcus had experienced that same fear many times, though in a different context, when navigating dangerous operations where mistakes could cost lives. After a few moments, Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "I need to know exactly what happened," he said. He asked questions methodically, making sure to understand the sequence of events. Reynolds responded honestly, recounting every detail. Marcus could tell the officer was sincere. He wasn't trying to hide anything, though his lack of experience showed in his nervous tone and fidgeting hands. As they continued speaking, the tension slowly began to ease. Marcus maintained a professional demeanor, even as he felt the sting of seeing his Ferrari damaged. He knew that this was just a material loss, one that could be repaired over time. Lives, on the other hand, could not always be fixed, and he reminded himself of that truth silently. Reynolds, sensing that Marcus was not angry in an unreasonable way, began to relax slightly, though guilt and concern were still evident. The first responders soon arrived at the scene. They began documenting the accident, taking photos of the vehicles and noting witness statements. Marcus cooperated fully, providing his information calmly and clearly. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through him, he remained in control, aware that any outburst could complicate the situation further. He had faced far more dangerous circumstances before, and he drew on that experience to navigate this one with patience and composure. Meanwhile, Marcus could not help but notice the reactions of the onlookers. Some stared openly at the Ferrari, their curiosity mixed with admiration and disbelief. Others whispered assumptions about the driver, making judgments without knowing anything about him. Marcus didn't respond to them. He had learned long ago that assumptions were a part of life, and they often revealed more about the observer than the person being observed. As the initial chaos settled, Marcus reflected quietly. He thought about the fragility of control, how quickly a moment could change everything, and how even the most carefully planned day could be disrupted in an instant. He also thought about the human element, how fear, inexperience, and split-second decisions could lead to unintended consequences. He understood that Reynolds had not acted out of malice, but from a combination of stress, distraction, and human error. By the time the scene was fully documented, Marcus and Reynolds had developed a mutual understanding, albeit unspoken. Marcus knew the importance of accountability, and Reynolds understood the seriousness of his mistake. They exchanged the necessary details, and Marcus made it clear that he expected the situation to be handled responsibly. It was a delicate balance, asserting authority without escalating tension, holding someone accountable without making the situation personal. Finally, Marcus took one last look at his Ferrari. The damage was extensive, but he reminded himself that this was not the end of the world. The car could be repaired, unlike trust or human life. He got back into his vehicle, carefully maneuvering it to a safe location for tow pickup, and prepared to continue his day, carrying with him the lessons of patience, understanding, and the unpredictable nature of life. As Marcus drove away, the city resumed its rhythm, the street returning to its usual noise and movement. But for Marcus, the incident would remain in his mind, a reminder that even in moments of frustration, composure, observation, and empathy could turn a potential disaster into a learning experience. He had faced danger countless times in his career, but this was a different kind of challenge, a test of patience, humility, and human connection played out on a busy city street in the form of a single, unexpected accident. After the crash, the tension between Marcus Thompson and Officer Daniel Reynolds didn't immediately disappear. Marcus could sense the young officer's nervous energy, the subtle shaking of his hands, the quick glances toward his patrol car as if he were seeking reassurance. Marcus himself remained calm, knowing that patience would be the key to resolving this without conflict. The Ferrari, still damaged and glinting in the morning sun, served as a constant reminder of how quickly a day could change. Reynolds took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice shaky but earnest. "Sir, I didn't see the light. I was responding to a call. I didn't mean to," he trailed off, realizing that excuses wouldn't make a dent in the situation. Marcus listened silently, letting the young officer finish his words. He had learned in his career that people often needed to express themselves to speak their truth before they could truly listen. "I understand," Marcus said finally, his tone calm but firm. "I don't think you acted with malice, but this was serious. My car is damaged and we need to handle this properly." His words were measured, not accusatory, yet they carried weight. Reynolds nodded, the reality of his mistake slowly settling in. He had collided with a Ferrari, a symbol of luxury that to him represented wealth and privilege. He hadn't realized that the man inside the car wasn't just a wealthy driver, but a federal agent trained in observation, composure, and negotiation. The initial exchange between them was delicate. Marcus could tell that Reynolds felt a mix of guilt and fear. He was worried not only about the damage to the car, but also about potential repercussions on his job. Marcus knew exactly how that felt, the weight of responsibility, the fear of making a mistake in the wrong moment, the anxiety of facing consequences. But he also knew that handling the situation with calm authority would make all the difference. As they spoke, Marcus noticed the subtle ways people on the street were reacting. Bystanders were curious, whispering to one another as they watched the exchange. Some seemed impressed by the Ferrari, others clearly curious about the young officer and the man he had collided with. A few were recording the scene on their phones, capturing every movement and word. Marcus didn't react. He had learned to ignore distractions and focus on the matter at hand. Reynolds took another step closer, lowering his voice. I just didn't think. I didn't expect anyone to be here." He looked at Marcus, searching for a sign of anger or forgiveness. Marcus simply nodded, acknowledging the honesty in the officer's words. "I get that," he replied. "But you have to understand this isn't just about the car. There are responsibilities on both sides. We need to follow the correct procedures and I expect full accountability." Reynolds swallowed hard, nodding again. He seemed to relax slightly, realizing that Marcus was not going to yell or escalate unnecessarily. Marcus had built his career on controlling high-stress situations, and this was no different, except the stakes were personal rather than professional. He could have reacted with anger or frustration, but he chose a different approach: calm observation, clear communication, and measured expectations. While they were speaking, Marcus's thoughts briefly wandered to the Ferrari itself. He had always loved the car not just for its speed or appearance, but because it represented a rare moment of personal achievement. After years of dedication to his work, it was a symbol of success and perseverance. Seeing it damaged was frustrating, yes, but he reminded himself that material objects could be repaired. What mattered most was human interaction, how people responded under pressure, how responsibility was taken, and how accountability was managed. Reynolds began asking Marcus questions, trying to understand exactly how to proceed. Do you want me to call insurance now?" he asked cautiously. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Not yet," he said. "We need to assess the situation, document everything correctly, and ensure we both understand what happened. Then we can move forward with insurance and repairs." His voice was calm, instructive, yet non-confrontational. It was during this exchange that Marcus decided to observe Reynolds more closely. He noticed small details: the way Reynolds shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the nervous tapping of his fingers, the avoidance of direct eye contact at certain moments. These were signs of anxiety and inexperience, not disrespect. Marcus had trained for years to read people, to understand motives, fears, and intentions. And in that moment, he recognized a young officer trying his best under pressure, unsure of how to navigate a mistake of this magnitude. At the same time, Marcus realized that Reynolds had made assumptions about him. The officer's initial tone had been slightly condescending, as if he assumed Marcus was just a wealthy civilian who had taken unnecessary risks on the road. Marcus knew that assumptions like these were common, but they could also be dangerous. In life, first impressions were often misleading, and this accident was a perfect example of how quick judgments could lead to misunderstanding and tension. Marcus decided it was time to clarify his position. "I need to be honest with you," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I am not just any driver. I am an FBI agent. This doesn't change the facts of what happened, but I want you to understand the context. I am responsible for my actions and yours in this situation." Reynolds froze, his eyes widening slightly. The revelation shifted the energy between them. Suddenly, the stakes were no longer just about a luxury car. They were about accountability, respect, and understanding the consequences of actions when they involved someone with federal authority. Reynolds took a moment to process the information. He swallowed hard and nodded, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. I didn't know," he admitted. "I would never have treated you differently if I had." Marcus nodded, recognizing the sincerity in the officer's voice. He knew that mistakes were part of life, and this young man had acted without malice. What mattered now was how they would handle the aftermath. With the tension beginning to ease, Marcus suggested a methodical approach. "We need to document everything: witness statements, photos of the cars, and a clear report of what happened. I'll cooperate fully, and I expect you to do the same. That way we can resolve this responsibly." Reynolds agreed, his tone now steadier. He seemed to relax slightly, knowing that Marcus was approaching the situation with fairness rather than anger. As they worked through the details, Marcus couldn't help but notice the reactions of people nearby. Some were curious about the Ferrari, while others seemed more interested in the interaction between the two men. Marcus reflected on how often appearances could be misleading, and how easily people made assumptions based on wealth, race, or profession. He had seen this in his career countless times, and this moment was no different, a lesson in human behavior unfolding in real time. Throughout the process, Marcus maintained his composure. He gave clear instructions, answered questions honestly, and remained patient even as Reynolds occasionally faltered or repeated himself out of nervousness. Marcus understood that patience was key. Escalating the situation with anger or sarcasm would not solve anything. It would only create more tension and potentially complicate the resolution. Reynolds, for his part, seemed to absorb the lesson. He began to approach the situation more professionally, asking questions in a respectful tone and carefully documenting every detail. He was learning, in real time, how to handle a high-stakes incident without panic or assumption. Marcus could see that this was a turning point for the young officer, a moment where he would carry lessons for the rest of his career. By the time the initial documentation was complete, Marcus and Reynolds had reached a mutual understanding. Marcus emphasized accountability, clarity, and responsibility, while Reynolds demonstrated a growing awareness of how his actions affected others. The tension had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted from fear and frustration to cautious respect. Both men recognized that this incident, while stressful, could be handled with integrity and professionalism. As the situation finally began to wind down, Marcus reflected on what had just happened. He thought about how quickly a day could change, how one moment of inattention could lead to consequences far beyond expectation. He thought about the human element, how fear, assumptions, and split-second decisions could affect everyone involved. And he thought about patience, understanding, and the importance of approaching situations with composure, no matter how stressful they might be. The young officer, meanwhile, was quiet for a moment, taking in everything Marcus had said and done. He seemed to understand that this was more than just an accident. It was a lesson in accountability, empathy, and professional conduct. Reynolds realized that how he handled mistakes could define him just as much as his successes, and that a calm, honest approach often led to the best outcomes. By the time Marcus finally left the scene, the Ferrari was carefully towed to a nearby garage for assessment. The damage was significant but repairable. More importantly, the interaction between him and Reynolds had set a tone of professionalism and understanding that would resonate beyond this single incident. Marcus drove away with a renewed sense of perspective, knowing that patience, calmness, and clarity could turn a potentially volatile situation into a constructive experience. And while the morning had begun with routine traffic and personal errands, it had ended with a profound lesson. That human behavior, when observed carefully and addressed thoughtfully, could transform mistakes into opportunities for learning, growth, and mutual respect. After the initial shock of the accident had passed, Marcus Thompson sat quietly in his office, reflecting on the events of that morning. The collision had left his prized Ferrari damaged, but more importantly, it had revealed something deeper about human behavior, judgment, and the consequences of assumptions. He knew that the young officer, Daniel Reynolds, had not acted with ill intent, but the incident had shown how quickly errors could escalate, even for someone trained in law enforcement. Marcus was no stranger to stressful situations. Every day, his work as an FBI agent required him to navigate high-stakes operations, make split-second decisions, and remain calm under pressure. Yet, despite this experience, he found the morning's events strangely personal. The Ferrari was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of his hard work, discipline, and accomplishments. Seeing it damaged so suddenly triggered an unexpected mix of frustration, reflection, and curiosity about the officer's mindset. Reynolds, meanwhile, returned to the precinct after the accident, still processing what had happened. His colleagues noticed the unusual tension in his demeanor. He recounted the collision in detail, carefully avoiding exaggeration, but the weight of the realization lingered. He had crashed a high-value vehicle, and to make matters more complicated, the driver had revealed himself as an FBI agent. It was a moment of embarrassment, but also a lesson in humility. Reynolds realized that first impressions and assumptions could be misleading, and that respect should never be withheld based on appearances. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a call from Reynolds. The young officer wanted to discuss the incident further, not out of fear, but out of a genuine desire to understand and make amends. Marcus agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a small cafe near the downtown district. The two men sat across from each other, the weight of the morning still lingering between them. Marcus could see that Reynolds was nervous but determined to engage honestly. "I wanted to speak with you," Reynolds began, his voice steady but careful. "Not just about the accident, but about how I handled things. I want to learn from this." Marcus nodded, appreciating the sincerity in the young officer's tone. He had seen this willingness to learn in recruits at the FBI Academy, and he knew it was a critical step toward growth and professionalism. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Daniel, this accident could have gone much worse for both of us. The important thing now is understanding what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent similar mistakes in the future. That's how we turn a negative situation into a constructive one." Reynolds listened intently, nodding. He could sense that Marcus was speaking not to reprimand him, but to guide him. As they spoke, Marcus explained the significance of accountability. "Every action has consequences," he said. "Sometimes those consequences are material, like a damaged car. Sometimes they affect people in ways we can't see immediately. The key is to face those consequences honestly and responsibly." Reynolds reflected on this, realizing how his quick response to the call earlier had unintentionally set the stage for a chain reaction. He had acted quickly, thinking only about the immediate task, without fully considering the broader situation. Marcus also took the opportunity to address assumptions and biases, though gently. "I could tell from the way you approached me initially that you had certain expectations about who I was. That's natural. We all make assumptions. But it's important to recognize them and not let them dictate how we treat others. Respect and professionalism should be the baseline always." Reynolds nodded, his expression thoughtful. He realized that his initial reactions had been influenced by his assumptions, and this recognition was uncomfortable but necessary. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Marcus and Reynolds discussed the process for insurance, repair estimates, and the necessary reports. Marcus emphasized the importance of clarity and thorough documentation. "Details matter," he said. "If we handle this correctly, it will resolve smoothly. If we cut corners or let emotions drive decisions, things can get messy fast." Reynolds agreed, noting that he had already begun preparing the necessary forms and witness statements. As they spoke, Marcus also shared a bit about his own experiences, though carefully, without revealing sensitive case details. He explained how he had learned, over years of law enforcement work, that mistakes were inevitable, but how one responded to them defined character. "We all make errors," he said. "What matters is how we handle them. Honesty, patience, and professionalism make all the difference." Reynolds absorbed this, realizing that the guidance was more valuable than any reprimand could have been. The discussion soon turned to communication. Marcus stressed that clear, calm communication was crucial in high-stress situations. He described how, in his line of work, misunderstandings could have life-or-death consequences. "If we panic or assume the worst, we escalate problems unnecessarily. But if we stay calm, listen, and respond thoughtfully, even difficult situations can be managed effectively." Reynolds listened carefully, recognizing the connection between the morning's events and the principles Marcus was sharing. After some time, Marcus decided to test Reynolds' understanding, not with a challenge but with a reflective question. "Daniel, imagine you're in a similar situation in the future. Someone makes a mistake that affects you personally. How would you handle it?" Reynolds paused, thinking carefully. I think I would stay calm, listen to the explanation, and focus on resolving the situation responsibly rather than reacting emotionally. Marcus nodded approvingly. Exactly. That mindset will serve you well both on the streets and in life. The conversation continued, and Marcus noticed a shift in Reynolds. The young officer was no longer defensive or anxious. Instead, he was engaged, curious, and eager to understand. Marcus realized that this moment, born from an accident, had become a teaching opportunity. He often reflected on such moments in his career, where unexpected circumstances became chances to mentor and guide others. As the cafe grew busier around them, Marcus and Reynolds moved from abstract principles to concrete steps. They reviewed how Reynolds would document the incident for his precinct, how he would submit the report, and how he would communicate with his superiors. Marcus emphasized transparency and accuracy, noting that integrity was always more important than saving face or avoiding embarrassment. Reynolds listened attentively, taking mental notes and asking questions where needed. Marcus also addressed emotional intelligence, the ability to understand not just facts but feelings, motivations, and perceptions. You have to consider how the other person feels, he explained, not just what happened. Even small gestures of respect and understanding can make a huge difference in resolving conflict. Reynolds reflected on this in the context of the morning accident. He realized that his initial approach, though procedural, lacked empathy, and that a small change in demeanor could have eased the tension significantly. By the end of their meeting, the mood had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a stressful, awkward encounter transformed into a constructive, educational experience. Marcus and Reynolds had built a foundation of mutual respect, with clear understanding of responsibilities, proper procedures, and the importance of integrity. Both men recognized that this accident, though frustrating and costly, had provided an opportunity for growth and reflection. As they parted ways, Marcus offered a few final words of advice. Daniel, remember that mistakes are inevitable. What defines you is how you respond. Learn from this and use it to become better, not just as an officer but as a person. Reynolds nodded solemnly, the gravity of the moment evident in his expression. He understood that this advice was not just about the Ferrari or the accident. It was about life, professionalism, and character. Marcus left the cafe, his mind returning briefly to the damaged Ferrari. He knew it would be repaired, restored to its former glory, but the lessons of the day would remain far longer. He reflected on human nature, the assumptions people make, the judgments they pass, and the importance of handling mistakes with patience and clarity. For him, this was another reminder that control over one's reactions often mattered more than control over circumstances. Reynolds returned to the precinct with a renewed perspective. He shared what he had learned with his colleagues, emphasizing the importance of respect, accountability, and thoughtful communication. The incident with Marcus Thompson became a quiet turning point for him, a reminder that mistakes, when handled correctly, could become powerful lessons. He resolved to approach every interaction with greater awareness, humility, and professionalism. The next few days involved practical follow-ups, insurance inspections, repair assessments, and reports submitted through official channels. Marcus monitored the progress, ensuring that procedures were followed accurately and professionally. Reynolds followed through diligently, demonstrating that he had absorbed the lessons Marcus had imparted. The Ferrari would be repaired and the reports filed, but the human lessons, the value of patience, accountability, and respect, would last far longer. By the end of the week, the incident that began as a sudden accident on a busy city street had evolved into a story of learning, growth, and understanding. Marcus reflected on the experience as an example of how unexpected challenges could reveal character, teach humility, and strengthen professional relationships. Reynolds, likewise, carried with him the realization that assumptions, fear, and haste could be tempered by patience, honesty, and empathy. In the broader context, the incident highlighted how even small moments, an accidental collision, a nervous glance, a calm word, could shape perspectives, influence behavior, and foster personal growth. Both men had come away changed, one with a repaired Ferrari and renewed insight into human behavior, the other with a deeper understanding of professionalism, accountability, and the importance of handling mistakes gracefully. As Marcus drove back to his office that afternoon, he smiled quietly to himself. The morning had started with a routine drive, but it had ended with lessons that would stay with both him and the young officer for years to come. In life, he realized, accidents were inevitable, but the way people responded to them defined not just the outcome of a single event, but the trajectory of their character and influence. The days following the accident slowly settled into a new rhythm for Marcus Thompson. His Ferrari was now at a specialized repair facility, examined by experts who understood the value and complexity of such a car. Each update reminded Marcus of the cost, the time, and the inconvenience, but it also reminded him of something more important: the way the situation had unfolded between two people who could have chosen conflict, but instead chose understanding. Marcus returned fully to his work. His role as an FBI agent demanded focus, and soon he was deep into case briefings, meetings, and long hours of investigation. Yet, even as he reviewed files and coordinated with his team, his thoughts occasionally returned to the young officer, Daniel Reynolds. The accident had not just been a disruption, it had become a lesson in responsibility, humility, and growth. Reynolds, on the other hand, was experiencing changes of his own. At the precinct, his supervisors reviewed the accident report carefully. Because Reynolds had been honest, thorough, and cooperative, the outcome was handled professionally. He received corrective guidance, additional training, and a clear reminder of the importance of attention and protocol. While the experience was uncomfortable, it was also constructive. Reynolds knew he had made a mistake, but he also knew he had been given a chance to learn from it rather than be defined by it. What stayed with Reynolds the most, however, was not the paperwork or the training sessions. It was Marcus's calm demeanor. He replayed their conversations in his mind, remembering how Marcus had chosen patience over anger and clarity over accusation. Reynolds realized that authority did not need to be loud to be powerful. True leadership, he learned, often spoke quietly and acted thoughtfully. A week later, Marcus received a call from the repair shop. The Ferrari's damage was significant but repairable. It would take time, precision, and expertise, but the car would be restored. Marcus thanked the technician and hung up, feeling a quiet sense of relief. The car mattered, yes, but what mattered more was the way the situation had reinforced his belief in professionalism and empathy. That same afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected message from Reynolds. The officer asked if they could speak again briefly. Marcus agreed. They met outside a modest cafe near the precinct, standing rather than sitting, the conversation casual but meaningful. "I just wanted to say thank you," Reynolds said honestly. "Not for the situation, but for how you handled it. You didn't have to treat me with respect after what happened, but you did." Marcus looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "We all make mistakes," he replied. "What matters is what we take from them. You owned yours. That says a lot." Reynolds smiled, relieved. "I've been thinking a lot since that day, about assumptions, about how quickly things can go wrong when you stop paying attention." Marcus appreciated the reflection. "If you carry that awareness forward," he said, "then something good came from all this." They shook hands, not as an agent and an officer, but as two professionals who had shared a moment that changed them both. As weeks passed, the incident slowly faded from public attention. There were no headlines, no viral clips, no lasting drama. And that, Marcus believed, was how it should be. Not every story needed noise. Some lessons were meant to be quiet, personal, and lasting. When the Ferrari was finally ready, Marcus drove to the repair shop early in the morning. The car stood polished and restored, its surface smooth, its lines flawless once more. The technician explained the repairs in detail, proud of the work. Marcus listened carefully, then thanked him sincerely. As Marcus slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, he felt something unexpected. Not excitement, but calm. The car was back, but he was different. The accident had reminded him that control was never absolute, no matter how skilled or prepared a person might be. What mattered was not avoiding every mistake, but responding wisely when mistakes happened. Driving through the city again, Marcus observed the streets with fresh perspective. He noticed how quickly people moved, how distracted drivers could be, how fragile routine truly was. He reminded himself that every person carried unseen struggles, responsibilities, and stories. At the precinct, Reynolds continued his duties with renewed focus. Fellow officers noticed the change. He was more attentive, more patient, and more thoughtful in his interactions. When newer officers joined, Reynolds shared his experience, not as a warning filled with fear, but as a lesson grounded in growth. He spoke about accountability, respect, and the importance of never letting assumptions guide behavior. The accident became a quiet reference point in his career, a moment that shaped how he approached every call, every stop, every conversation. Reynolds understood now that professionalism was not just about enforcing rules, but about treating people with dignity, no matter who they were or what they drove. Months later, Marcus and Reynolds crossed paths again by chance at a community event focused on public safety and cooperation. They exchanged nods and brief smiles, no words needed. Both understood that their shared experience had created a bond rooted in respect and learning. Marcus later reflected on the irony of the situation. A moment of chaos had led to clarity. A damaged car had led to repaired perspectives. What could have turned into conflict instead became a story of accountability and growth. He realized that life often tested people not in grand moments but in sudden, ordinary disruptions. A traffic light missed, a decision made too quickly, a reaction chosen without thought. And in those moments, character was revealed not by perfection, but by response. As Marcus parked his Ferrari in his driveway that evening, the setting sun casting warm light across the hood, he felt gratitude, not for the accident but for the lesson. It had reminded him why he had chosen a life of service in the first place, to protect, to guide, and to lead with integrity. Reynolds, finishing his shift that same evening, felt something similar. He knew he was still learning, still growing, but he also knew he was better than he had been before. The experience had sharpened his awareness and strengthened his sense of responsibility. In the end, the story was not about a luxury car or a title. It was about two people brought together by an unexpected event, each walking away with a deeper understanding of respect, accountability, and humanity. And while the accident itself became just another entry in official records, the impact it had on both lives quietly endured, proof that even difficult moments could leave behind something meaningful, if handled with patience, honesty, and care.